Welcome to the 15-Minute Patriot podcast. I am Ross the Dude Maher from Rhode Island, and I am joined by my colleagues Dave the Wildman Wilder from southeastern Massachusetts and David Saad from the free state of Florida. At 15-Minute Patriot, we focus on action steps. That is, what you can do as a citizen, as a voter, to make a difference. So even if you'll just take 15 minutes a month, you'll be pleasantly surprised to see what you can accomplish. We, the people, are at the top of the government, and it's time to get involved. Lastly, we want to hear from you and about the things that you've done to make a difference. So you can email us at 15minutepatriot@gmail.com. That's 15minutepatriot@gmail.com. Or you can find us on Facebook at 15-Minute Patriot. And with that, leading us from the southeastern portion of Massachusetts is Dave the Wildman Wilder.
Yay. Hey, y'all. So, our last episode suggested organizing a rally or a protest requires the organizer to ensure the peaceful and lawful actions of participants. So that got me thinking about the phrase, you get the government you deserve. Yeah, that came to mind. So now here in the 15-Minute Patriot, we encourage the masters of our republic, which is we the people, to be informed and involved in governance. But I have to ask, is our present society a true reflection of who we are? Or have we allowed others to manipulate it apart from the will of the people? So Benjamin Franklin said, only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. As nations become corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters, which is interesting. And another founder, Robert Winthrop, he was the Speaker of the U.S. House also. He said, men, in a word, must necessarily be controlled either by a power within them or by a power without them, either by the word of God or by the strong arm of man, either by the Bible or by the bayonet. So it does seem reasonable to take a moment and ask if each of us, in some small way, is responsible for the present state of society. Does my tolerance mandate approval? What place does morality have or should have? What is the result of my silence or inaction? So, citizen, let us take some let's take some time to do some healthy introspection. What can a citizen do to fail in their responsibility to be part of our republic? So that's the topic tonight. So just kind of taking a flip side of what we normally talk about.
Well, citizens, have always had in instances have stood by while someone was in need, someone was getting beaten up or robbed or just needed help, and they just walk on by. But I think now it's getting really serious, and that even the media will stand there and look at a fire and a city being ripped apart and say, it's peaceful. Yeah. It's a peaceful demonstration. And as we said off the air, I think we don't have media anymore. We have various propaganda outlets. Maybe that was always true, but I think now it's become really, really pervasive.
Well, with those quotes, I mean, there was a sense that morality was a big part of what our society was about. We had a common sense of the proper action, what is right and wrong, how a citizen should act. And I think those guide rails have been pushed aside almost entirely. And now, we have, LGBTQ, protests for Palestine and for the, pro, Muslim communities. And that doesn't make any sense at all. I mean, those people of that sexual persuasion would be stoned in those societies. So why would you stand up and advocate for it? So I'm kind of I'm trying to wrap my head around, how does what does somebody think to get to that point of saying, oh, this is how the world should be. This is what I'm going to be fighting for, even though it has no basis in reality or facts.
Do you think that the unflinching hatred of an individual or a group just skews a person's outlook on something to the point where they become irrational?
Yes. I 100% agree with that. And I think that certain individual happens to be the current president of the United States. I've experienced, and it's sad to say, in my own family, this level of, I'll call it rage. And I'm talking about in my extended family, aunts and uncles just going on these rants that are just, I'll say, devoid of logic, or they make these accusations. And I don't want to get into the tit for tat with family. But I there are times when I just want to say, when did he say that? Where did he say that? More importantly, what was the context of what was being said? And it just you can't see wrap your head around the logic of the whole thing. And then even and I'll even say, even my own mother, right? Love the woman to death, of course. She's my mom, but you can see it. There's something about his personality that just really rubs some people the wrong way.
Yep.
And it has nothing to do with his policy decisions of any kind. Any kind.
Yep.
It's just absolutely just rubs people the wrong way.
Yeah.
To that point, Ross, I mean, I always bring in sports into a lot of conversations because it's such a reflection sometimes of life. But some of the worst, I shouldn't say worst, but some of the toughest, meanest managers in football and baseball and hockey and everything, they were just unbelievably miserable, but they were winners. And they were respected, and they were looked at by the people who played underneath them, the players, with respect. But you can hate the hate just bubbles over rather than say, okay, listen, we've got him for 3 more years. And what has he done that's really been bad? I mean, I still have all my rights. Hopefully I'll do better financially, but they can't see that. They just can't. They're blinded. And this is the thing that's scary because now they're saying things like, recently I just read where some woman said that she hopes that somebody dies. And I'm thinking this is remind of World War II. I mean, 1939 Germany. They picked out Hitler and the Nazis picked out a certain class of people. They were pegged to be the reason for all that was wrong with Germany.
Yeah.
And look what happened.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not far from that. Well, now they're saying that 77 million people in this country, they've called us every name in the book.
Yeah.
But getting back to when is rational thinking going to step in and saying this behavior is unacceptable? We can walk around with signs and everything else and raise our voices and protest, but to block roads, to burn buildings, to break glass, to do all of these things and to ruin businesses that have nothing to do with it is beyond the pale. And we as citizens have got to say, this is wrong. This is wrong, and I'm not going to be part of it. But
I go back to Franklin's quote or Winthrop's quote about, I think each of us has a sense that there's something bigger than ourselves. And back in the day, that morality was based on the Bible or some religious teaching. And we had a sense that, like our Declaration of Independence says, our rights come from God. So we had this sense that, we have to answer to God at some point. So we have to behave ourselves, kind of a thinking. And now we've kind of pushed God out of our social dialogue. Churches and synagogues have been suppressed. They're not part of that social dialogue anymore. And so people are looking for things to fight for. And so you fight for the underdog, and you fight for some mission that you feel strongly about. And it could be Palestine, it could be gay rights, it could be abortion, but that's the thing that's replaced our fear of God, if I can use the phrase. I mean, that's kind of the context I'm trying to understand how people think. That need to do something good for the world beyond ourselves.
So with that, kind of hopping off of that same vein, for lack of a better term, I think is really the word accountability, right? I think people behaved in a certain way, especially around the era of the founding, because they felt a level of accountability, or that they would be held to account for their themselves and their actions by God. And as time has gone on and society, in my opinion, has fallen, that level of accountability has gone away. People don't feel that they will be held to account for whatever their decisions and actions and statements may be. And I think not only is it does it kind of permeate society in general, but it plays out in the government. You see people doing things all the time and never held to account for what it is that they did. Even more recently, what they're talking about now, and you mentioned the bombings of the Iranian nuclear facilities. There was a leak within these last couple of days in which certain media outlets ran with that story, which is basically sowing the doubt that the mission was effective to begin with. If that person, not that I was about to say, if that person is who I think they are, not that I know who this person is, but if they're working in that environment where they had access to basically classified material and they leaked that out, that is treason. That is a crime, and that person needs to be held to account.
Yes, absolutely.
But it can't end there. We all have to be held accountable in our own way.
Yeah, to that point, I'm sensing a lot of frustration that, based upon what you just said, held to accountability. We never found out who the leak was in the Supreme Court.
Yep.
And right now, there is a law that says that if you are a communist, you cannot run for public office in the United States. This guy Mamadi, or whatever his name is a avowed communist. He said it. So now somebody said, okay, he should be, arrested, or said, no, you can't run. Is it going to happen? I mean, we seem to be putting aside our laws to satisfy, and we're not, satisfy these little individuals, these certain individuals, and the laws have been, the hell with them, just be damned. Like these judges who are overstepping their bounds by leaps and bounds to file these injunctions or to uphold these injunctions. Anyway, I think ultimately what we're trying to say tonight is that it's really incumbent upon us. We're the people, we're the power. And I think we've abdicated that power in so many ways. And we've accepted performance far below what our founding fathers would have ever accepted from our government. We would never, if we all owned a certain business, and I've owned businesses, and to accept this level of poor performance by the people that we've elected is terrible. We wouldn't accept that from the people that work from us. We would not. Our bosses would never accept that kind of performance from us in working with different companies, and yet we as people accept it. It's, I don't know. I can't get my arms around it. Sometimes I'm glad I'm as old as I am, because I won't be around much longer to see what really happens, what ultimately happens.
I think there's a sense too in society that you can't be critical of anything. If you're critical, then you're called some kind of name that you're the bad guy if you're critical of something. And I have to put, a lot of responsibility back on our religious foundations in our churches. They are not speaking up. They've been silenced, and I think that's a big problem when you don't have a voice to advocate for morality, for righteousness, if you will. Some things are wrong, some things are evil, and boy, just mentioning the word evil in public, you're seen as some kind of crazy right-wing terrorist. So
I'll give you a real example of that. I'm not going to quote the Bible specifically because I don't have the quote off the top of my head, but you can look it up yourself. Where does that moral authority come from? It comes from the Bible, right? And so How does the Bible describe, that's the written word of God, how does it describe homosexuality? And it describes it as, quote, an abomination. That's not that's God's written word there. And so you have many churches, and you go back to was it Inauguration Day, when President Trump was at one of the churches in DC, and there was the female pastor that starts to lecture him from the pulpit.
Yes.
So when you have people like that who are leading the churches, then no wonder you have that moral corruption happening.
And that moral corruption, Ross, was based on the fact that she was receiving, or had received, over $50 million from USAID.
Boom.
Did you know that?
I did not.
Yeah,
I probably heard that, but
yeah, her organization and her received over $50 million of taxpayer, 50 million taxpayer dollars. So I always go back to Nixon's famous words: just follow the money.
Yeah.
Everything is rooted, and I think, in money. Sorry to say, but you're right. They've abdicated their role as a moral leader, and a church leader, and a spiritual leader, for things that are just terrible. But there are a few of them. There are a few of them that are out there. I mean, I look at Franklin Graham, who's picked up what his father did, and I mean, his thing there, Samaritan's Purse. I donate to it because they stepped in where the government failed in the Carolinas during the last hurricane.
Yeah.
And people like that do exist amongst us. They're all for good. They are.
And it's also oftentimes a difficult discussion about, I think we all have our problems. I don't think I'm better than anybody else. But I don't ask people to approve of my failings. We can accept, we can tolerate,
and forgive,
and love and all that stuff. But to approve, that's where I think we've gone astray. That if we tolerate something, we therefore must say it's okay, that it's fine, that it's something that should be, put on a pedestal and desired. And that's not the case.
Yeah. Well,
pedophilia is bad. I don't care where you're coming from. No, that's evil. But there are some niches that say that's a natural passion, and what's wrong with that, and who are you to say that? And it's just, no, sorry, wrong, evil, stop it.
Yeah.
You got to have that. That's a moral stance, and that could be a difficult thing to say in today's society. Anyway.
So, Dave, reflecting back on your open commentary, what can a citizen do to fail in their responsibility to be part of our republic? And as I was kind of reviewing your notes, I was like, the first thing that kind of popped into my mind is that people just don't care. And I'll give you a perfect example. So in my town, as the result of the passing of my state senator, there's now a special election. And so I actually went and volunteered to help out one of the candidates yesterday, which was interesting in and of itself in many ways. And as I was just kind of sitting there in campaign headquarters, there's a lot of lists of people's names and this, that, and the other thing. And I happened to notice where I expected to see some names of people that I knew, their names were not there. And so as I started thinking about it more and more, I was like, part of the issue is that these people just don't really care about voting. It's not, civic duty, civic responsibility, rather, just doesn't seem to be an important thing. And then, the end result being is that you get people who make decisions that you don't agree with. And then I think you've mentioned it many times, they're just sitting there yelling at the television about, well, why are you doing that? Why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense, and so on. And and I get it, like you just said, obviously none of us are perfect. We all have challenges. At different times, we just don't have the time available. But at the same time, I mean, how long does it take to vote? And I think of a lot of World War II era. It's funny, you know, as I was sitting there in the campaign headquarters, I heard comments about like, you know, these elderly people in town, and it's like, oh, they'll vote if they can get a ride. All right, I'll get them a ride, and it's just, you know, you can see the action happening, and it always reminded me of like, you know, people in my grandparents' generation, that World War II generation, of they'll be damned if they didn't vote.
Mm.
You know, they took that civic responsibility so seriously. You know, they'd stand in the rain if they needed to in order to have their vote counted.
Yeah.
And it makes me think to myself, like, man, where are we going wrong?
Yeah. Yeah. So Dave, do you have any closing thoughts for us?
I do. I have a couple.
But I thought you might.
Yeah. But I remember the following words by a villain in a Batman movie. Criminals thrive on the indulgence of society's understanding. When riots erupt, they signal more than just chaos. They reveal a critical test of civic responsibility. While law enforcement and public officials have a duty to restore order, ordinary citizens also bear responsibility. And too often, people retreat into silence, afraid, indifferent, or unsure. But inaction is not neutral. It creates a vacuum where violence is allowed to thrive. Staying silent, rationalizing destruction, or looking the other way doesn't just protect the rioters. It weakens the very foundation of our communities. There's a clear difference between peaceful protest and violent unrest, and it's up to all of us to make that distinction. If we fail to stand up for law, for peace, and for our neighbors, we allow the loudest, most destructive voices to dominate. Civic courage doesn't always mean confrontation. It means speaking out against violence, supporting those who protect our streets, and defending the values that hold us together, especially when it's difficult, because when good people choose not to act, we all pay a price, not just in broken property, but in broken trust and a weakened democracy. In the words of Edmund Burke, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing.
Yeah.
With that said, and going back to what Ross had said, this week I spent and sent out over 122 letters to my state representatives in Florida, alerting them to a problem that exists. Some of them, a lot of them got back to me, and some of those didn't even know that this problem existed. And some of them lived here a long time. And they want to meet with me in a group Zoom to be able to ask me questions and to let me tell them and inform them as to what's going on.
That's awesome.
People,
awesome.
You have to contact. If you're upset about something, do something about it.
Yeah.
Do something about it. Your voice will be heard as long as you keep on knocking at that door. Anyway,
Absolutely.
Enough preaching.
All right. That does it for this episode. Please give us a contact. We'd love to hear your comments, and maybe tell us what you've been doing to contact your representatives and what topics you want to hear. All right. Thanks. Till next time.